Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Yaki Smith is known for his unflinching and voracious style of storytelling and is a rising voice in independent cinema. His films have received worldwide acclaim, screening and winning awards at over 100 film festivals. The Directors Guild of America, the Student Academy Awards, HBO, Showtime honored him, and two cities, the city of Buffalo, New York, and the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, proclaimed two different days in 2013 and 2019 as Yaki Smith Day. His short, Katrina's Son, screened at over 40 film festivals and won 14 awards. This film was also eligible for the 2012 Academy Award in Short Filmmaking. Yaki's debut feature, Wolf, which NPR called an impressive piece by a young director, premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival and has gone on to screen and win awards at festivals across North America. Wolf is now available for download on several video-on-demand outlets. His short film, Dawn, made its television premiere on HBO in 2015 and screened on the network for 2 years. His web series, The Beginning and Ending of Everything, is currently streaming on the digital platform A Space for Creators. Currently, Yaki has 3 projects on the film festival circuit: Brother, The Pandemic Chronicles, and Edwin, all of which have won awards at numerous film festivals. Yaki has been featured on NPR, CNN, HLN, Ebony Online, IndieWire, Filmmaker Magazine, and Shadow and Act. Yaki graduated with his BA from the Communication Arts Department at the University of the Incarnate Word, where he later became the youngest recipient of the Alumni of Distinction for Professional Achievement Award. He received his MFA from the University of Texas at Austin's film program, where he is currently an associate professor of film and the associate dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Moody College of Communication. He was previously the Morgan Woodward Distinguished Professor of Film at the University of Texas at Arlington. Variety magazine named him one of the best film educators in the world. Please welcome Yaki Smith to Kansas City Art Institute and to the Current Perspectives lecture series.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Samantha. And thank you for the invitation to come and speak tonight. It is always an honor when anyone asks me to come and speak about my work, because I'm always just thinking about making the work, not really talking about it. And so to have an opportunity to create discourse around it, to talk about the process, to give people a little bit of insight into this crazy mind of mine, is always an honor and a pleasure. And I want to say one thing too. When I saw your land acknowledgement, I smiled because this is something that at UT we have been talking about, and it's something that we also do. I don't think we do it as much as we should, but it is great when we acknowledge the land on which we stand on, and when we acknowledge, the people who actually inhabited that land before we did, because it shows, one, not only honor, but it shows respect. And I believe that when you respect the land and the people who inhabited the land, that the land will respect you back. And so it is great to see that you all are doing that. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to share my screen now. I guess I should do that. Give me 1 second here. Here we go. And I'm going to make this full screen. Here we go. All right. So tonight, the name of my lecture is Making Freedom Real: Film as a Tool for Liberation. And I always start most lectures actually with a few quotes, because I like to give context to not only my work, but also sort of the lineage with which my work comes from. I am not the first social justice filmmaker. I am not the first to boast the idea of using film as a tool for liberation, as a tool for social justice, as a tool to really begin uncomfortable conversations. As a matter of fact, I think that probably was one of the first reasons why somebody took a camera and put it on the face of another human being. is to really begin to start these conversations that we did not want to have, because they understood the power. And they understood that when you looked at something on a screen, um, that it gave that something greater meaning, right? Because you have someone in a room or a group of people in a room, which makes it a communal experience, which changes the experience altogether. But you have arrested them, right? They are there to watch. It is a dark space. They are usually silent, hopefully, right? Sometimes I go to the films and I do talk back at the screen, depending upon what's happening. But normally people are silent, and they are captivated by whatever message that you are giving them. And one of the things I always like to say is there are many filmmakers who would say that they are not political filmmakers, who would say that they just want to create art or film for entertainment. And I would say to them, yes, I hear that, and I hear that you want to create your film for entertainment. But even the sort of idea of doing that is a political act, because the erasure of certain things is a political act. Creating joy in a space is a political act. Showing certain people in love who have been marginalized and not been able to be shown in love on a screen, that is indeed a political and radical act. And so whether or not you believe that what you're making has impact, it does, and it affects change in some way. What is politics? It's nothing but our way of living and thinking and breathing, right? It's the thing that sort of drives us. It's our moral compass. And so again, whatever you put on the screen is political, because you are telling me something about yourself and the ways in which you see the world. And I like to start with, and I won't read both of these quotes. I'll actually jump to the James Baldwin one, where he says, all art is a kind of confession, more or less oblique. All artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to tell the whole story, to vomit the anguish up. And one key phrase out of that I always like to pull is to tell the whole story and to vomit the anguish up. Because I do believe that what you can do with a film, and any great piece of art, but I always say film because I do believe that um, all of us, right? You'd be hard pressed to probably find anybody that is in this presentation right now who has not, in some way, probably today, right, watched the moving image. It is a YouTube video. It is a commercial. It is an Instagram post. It is everywhere, right? So we are always engaged with film or the moving image in some way. And so I believe that because we are constantly in conversation with the moving image, that is in some ways probably one of the most powerful forms of art that we actually have. Because again, in that medium, to go back to James Baldwin's quote, we can tell sort of the whole story. Now, the whole story, right, is relative, right? Because the whole story depends upon who's telling the story. And we know that, right? We understand, as they say, that the victors are the ones who get to tell the narrative. And so we understand that. But when I say the whole story, I mean at least your whole truth, right? And a truth that can make people see the world in a very, very different way than they've ever seen the world. And so I just like to start there with that, to give you context for who I am and where I am as a filmmaker, because I did not get into film for the beauty of it, right? And a lot of people are like, huh, you didn't fall in love with film because of E.T., right? Love E.T., but that is not the movie that made me fall in love with film. I fell in love with film because I understood at age 11 when I sat in a movie theater and I watched John Singleton's Boys in the Hood. I understood that I was watching something that was going to change people's lives, but it was also going to change the ways in which um, people saw a certain demographic, right? Up to that point, and just a little bit about myself, up to that point, those characters in Boys in the Hood, I knew them, right? I understood them. I was living in an environment that was very similar to that, to the environment that was sort of shown or depicted in Boys in the Hood. And I knew Doughboy, right? I knew Ricky, right? I knew Trey. I knew all of those individuals because they were my god brothers, right? They were my cousins. They were my uncles, right? And I saw how they were demonized and vilified in the media. how every time you saw them, it was some negative story that they were killers, that they were robbers, that they were born evil, that there was no hope for them, right? And that's always sort of the news sort of flash, right, that goes across the screen or that you find in the newspaper, but nobody gave any context to who they were, to their struggle, to what they were dealing with, to the ways in which society, in many ways, had railroaded them into a certain sort of kind of lifestyle or type of lifestyle. Nobody told that narrative. Nobody talked about gentrification. Nobody talked about how crack had sort of ravaged communities of color, Black communities. Nobody really talked about that. And when I saw Boys in the Hood, I said, somebody gets it. Somebody sees me, somebody sees us. And because they, right, had the boldness and the audacity to put that on screen, in all its glory and its ugliness, its beauty, and all of it, right? That other people would now see that narrative and see those individuals for who they really were. And so it would be much more difficult to judge them because now, again, you know the whole story, right? All right. And now to my own work. I will talk about 6 of my films, starting with Katrina Sun, which we shot in 2010, 2009 actually. So you'll get about a decade's worth of work here because Edwin was shot in 2020, 2019 and released in 2020, sorry. But you'll get a decade's worth of work here. So you'll see sort of how um, my focus has changed, but yet how it's remained the same. You'll see how the filmmaking has become a little bit more refined, how my eye has become much more focused, how the stories that I want to tell have become much more nuanced. But from Katrina Sun on, you will still see the same thing, and that is giving visibility to those who have been deemed invisible and giving voice to those whose voices have been stolen from them. That is the thing that I have always wanted to do since I was 15 years old. Since again, I sat in that movie theater and saw Boys in the Hood at 11. And when I finally made my first film at 15, that has always been my mantra as a filmmaker and my mission. And so that is what you will see tonight as I walk you through this body of work. And again, this is not the full body of work. I've actually made films post Edwin already because I am constantly shooting things. But I just want to kind of give you a quick glimpse into what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And again, we'll start with Katrina Sun. How would I read the log line, but you can see it here. Um, Katrina Sun is an interesting project because, and you will hear this echoed throughout this presentation. Um, and if you know any filmmakers, if you have an opportunity to talk to any filmmakers, you'll probably hear this again and again and again. And I laugh a little bit because every time I'm in a space with a bunch of filmmakers, this is the narrative. And the narrative is, I had a feature film script that I wanted to get made and I couldn't raise the money for it. So what did I do? I shot a short. And that is how Katrina Sun came to be. When Hurricane Katrina hit some 15 years ago, I was living in Austin, Texas at the time. I was in film school. And my wife worked at a hotel that was right next to, or a few blocks away from the Austin Convention Center. And I remember when the storm hit New Orleans, I watched every day, all day, whenever I could. When I went in school, I was watching. And I was watching for several reasons. One, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe that people literally were floating. Dead bodies were floating in water. I couldn't believe that people had been abandoned and left to fend for themselves. I couldn't believe that our government had decided that those individuals were not worthy of saving. And I couldn't believe just all of the image and the stories that I was hearing that was coming out of New Orleans. Jump up to, people getting out of New Orleans and New Orleanians sort of being, kind of taken all over the country, but mainly Texas. A lot of them ended up in Texas. Houston, San Antonio, and some in Austin, taking me full circle back to where I started this thing, and my wife working at the convention center. And I'll never forget that I would go there um, to either, have lunch with her or pick her up or whatever we would, and I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of individuals, again from New Orleans. And one of the things that I kept hearing echoed over and over and over and over again was this sense of abandonment, this sense of, again, the government deciding that I am not worthy. Um, but the interesting thing about it is it wasn't as shocking as you would think. And what I mean by that is New Orleans was already a city that had been in some ways abandoned. There's a lot of, corruption there. There's a lot of misuse of funds. At one point, and it may still it had one of the worst education systems in the United States of America. The poverty was out of this world, off the charts. Um, and again, people had already felt as though their lives didn't matter, that they had been abandoned. And so it wasn't necessarily a shock. It's always interesting because it makes me think of sort of what happens, on May 26th or 23rd with George Floyd, right? This is not a new thing for those who have lived it, witnessed it, seen it their whole lives. But it is once a camera is put on the tragedy, that for some reason we wake up and we believe the narratives that we've been being told. And that's what happened with New Orleans. All of a sudden, we understood what it meant, again, to be abandoned in that way. And one of the things also that I kept hearing was about the children, the children, the children. Where are the children? There were so many kids who had either been separated from their families because they're getting on different buses and things like that. And in the sort of rush of doing that, some people, again, just got separated. Um, there were some individuals, obviously, whose parents had died, and they didn't have family. So here they are, a 10, 11, 12-year old child, in some ways fending for themselves, and now they're thrust into the sort of the foster care system. And what does that mean to have lived your life with your family in New Orleans, and all of a sudden you're in, Washington or New York or some sort of random place. You don't know where you are. And then there were some who literally almost disappeared, right? Because not only did they lose their families, but they lost any connection with uh, people who were not even in their immediate family, right? And so it was like, where is that young man? What happened to that young woman? We don't know. And it was from sort of that vantage point that I began to write Katrina's Son, because the only thing that I could think about, and I wasn't a father then, but the only thing that I could think about is what would happen to me if I was 11 years old and I didn't have my family. I didn't have my mom. I didn't have a support system. I didn't have anyone to care for me anymore. What would I do? A little side note, I remember when I was about 11, actually, I might have been younger. I was in the mall, and I got separated from my mom. And I can remember the fear of that, right? Because when you're 9 or whatever, I think it's 9 or 10 or something, but when you're that young, right, you don't know the difference between being separated in the mall and actually never seeing, right, your mom again, because you have been lost, right? You have been separated and you may never connect with them again. I remember that feeling even at that young age. And so with that in mind, I went into sort of creating this narrative and saying, well, what does it mean to lose again everyone and everything that you know, and then have to again figure it out on your own? And from that, I made Katrina's Son, which is basically about a young boy who travels to San Antonio in search of his mother, who abandoned him some years earlier. And all this young man has is a postcard, you know, or postcards, I'll say, because that's always up for debate, in terms of, does he have more than one, or is it just the one, yet he imagined the others? But all he has is his mom's voice, again, vis-a-vis this one postcard or these postcards that she sent him. And that is driving him towards her throughout the entire narrative. He is heading towards this woman who he hasn't seen since he was probably 3 or 4. Again, there's no connection between them. He barely knows what she looks like, again, except through old photos that his grandmother, who has died, gave him. So he has nothing but this postcard. And as you watch the film, you see him navigating San Antonio again on his own, meeting certain individuals and trying to figure out where his mother is without really understanding, again, that the image that he's probably created of her is not an accurate image of who she is. And I want to show you a clip from that film now. Sorry, y'all. I messed up here. Give me 1 second. 1 second. Here we go. And two gentlemen died in front of me because of dehydration. Katrina swept through the city. Here, take this. I know, wake up. 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 I know. Like a motherless child, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. I feel like I've missed out on most of your life. Even though I know you're my son, sometimes it seems like you're more your grandma's. It's so hard being away from y'all. All right. I feel like you can no longer see me because I cannot see myself. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second here. I'll start my video. Here we go. Okay. All right. All right. Sorry about that. All right, so that film, as I sort of started saying, again, it started off as a feature, and still in the process of trying to, make that feature, but it sort of has evolved into something completely different. I am now working on another film, which is about a Hurricane Katrina evacuee and how her story intersects with a Mexican immigrant, two individuals who have lost their children. One, the Mexican immigrant who's on the quest to find his daughter, who was taken from him at the border some 6 months ago, and him sent back to Mexico with the promise of them sending her, which is something that is actually was happening on the border for a long time. and he's not seen her, so he comes back, and he and this Hurricane Katrina evacuee, they end up sort of forming a relationship, and coming together to help each other through their pain, and ultimately she helps him find his daughter. And so that sort of again it evolved from sort of Katrina's son into this new thing. But I only say that because I have been interested in sort of interrogating Hurricane Katrina since it happened, for several reasons. One, again, I had never seen anything like it in my life, and also I felt as though, and I still feel this way, that we feel like, oh, that happened 15 years ago, so everything is good, but it's not good. Because if you return to New Orleans now, you will see that it has been uh, gentrified, right, or developed in such a way where those who used to live there can hardly no longer afford to live there, and that begs the question of what really went down in that city in the first place. And so I've just been interested in that, and I'll continue to explore that until we get this film made. Next up uh, was my film Wolf, which was my debut feature. And as we know, and again, I've alluded to this a couple of times already, we short films are great, and I love making shorts. You will hear me talk about shorts again throughout this presentation. But as filmmakers, we want to make our feature films, right? We want to create more long form content. One, because we have, narratives that we want to tell that require more than 15 or 20 minutes. Um, but also because in some ways, making the feature um, is a surefire way. And I shouldn't even say that because it's not necessarily surefire, but it is a way of showing, film companies, agents, distributors. If you want to get into television, right, this is a way in which you can show them what you have, right? These are your chops, right? I can make a feature, I can assemble a team, I can sort of lead the charge and get this thing made. Um, and that really, again, helps you to get your foot into other doors within the medium of a sort of film, TV, new media, or whatever it may be. Um, and Wolf is an interesting film because just like most of my work, it comes from me reacting um, to something that I saw and then realizing that it was something that I was always interested in. And I say it that way because of this. One day I was watching a documentary called Deliver Us from Evil, the Academy Award winning documentary. And it was about a priest who had molested, I don't even remember the number. I mean, this was probably 50 to 70 children. And this is happening over the course of 30 years or more. And this priest is being moved around, right? From parish to parish. He's going from place to place. Um, and instead of him being reprimanded, or instead of him being set down, arrested, really, um, brought to justice in some way, that never happened, right? They decided that they would just move him from place to place, literally from country to country, hoping, I guess, that he would stop doing this. But in fact, all it did was empowered him and gave him more agency. And one scene in particular brought me to this. There was a young lady um, in her 20s, and her family was very close to this particular priest. And when he went to jail finally, um, he called the family and he talked to the mother and the father, and they, of course, sent him the money that he needed. They were in close contact with him. They were literally fighting for his release. And they called their daughter one day and said, "You won't believe what's going on here, what's happening." She's, father, I can't think of his name, was arrested. Why was he arrested? Oh, he was arrested because they said he was molesting, kids. And we don't believe this. This is just you know, a way to discredit him, right? He would never do anything like that. We love him. And the mom said the daughter said, I have to get off the phone. I have to go. And the mom said she looked at the father and was like, something's not right here, right? Something is weird. She talks to you more than she talks to me. You should call her. And he called his daughter. And basically, long story short, his daughter said, yeah, I know that it's true because he did it to me. And he did it to me for years. And I'll never forget that the father said that was the moment when I realized that there was no God, that there was no way that if there was a God, that he would have allowed this to happen to me, and that he would have brought this man into my life because the man had meant so much to that family. They had literally left their daughter with him when they were going on vacations, the whole nine. And as I'm watching that, all these old memories start to come back in me. I'm a church boy. I grew up in the church, still very much connected to the institution. And I can remember some of my friends telling me when they were young that these things had happened to them. And whenever they would go to get help, they were told a multitude of things, but mainly, what did you do to bring it upon yourself? Um, you cannot let this go public because you cannot discredit the work that this individual has done. And three, if you say anything, we will disown you. And these are family members who are disowning these individuals because they refuse to believe. And so the sort of deliver us from evil, and then my own sort of rushing back to those memories. I sat down and literally I started writing this piece because I wanted to talk about what it means when your faith is shaken to the core because of such a heinous act, because of such a great betrayal from someone who you had revered, who you loved, who you willingly let into your space. What is the guilt behind that? Because when I go back to the Father and delivers from evil, there's a lot of guilt that comes with that comment, because in his mind, he opened the door for that to happen to his daughter because he allowed this man into his daughter's intimate space, into his family's intimate space. Basically, he allowed this man to become a part of his family. And so I sat down, and again, I started writing this piece about a family again that discovers their son has been molested. And it's really about these people not only coming to terms with the sexual abuse and trying to get their son to confess it because they have evidence, but the son refuses to confess it because of all of the other complicated things that come with someone being sexually abused at such an early age, right? This idea of almost falling in love with their abuser, feeling like the abuse was their fault, feeling like no one else will ever love them because of the abuse. So now finding themselves in a very manipulative relationship with their abuser. So it's all of that, but it's also this family having to come to terms with this idea that just because this happened to them and this man did this to them, it doesn't mean that God has done this to them, that their faith has to be completely shaken. And it also has to do with this idea of idolatry, right? We have the tendency to worship um, our faith leaders, right? I've witnessed this myself, and sometimes we see this, but them coming to terms with understanding that no, that individual was not God, that you must separate even God from the institution, right? These are two completely sort of different things, and them coming to terms with that. Um, and yeah, I want to show you a clip from Wolf. And I should set this clip up because another thing, and this came much later in the process of making this film, of writing this film. It probably was one of the last scenes I wrote. My research really started to show me that, and this is obviously not true of everyone, right? And I won't even call it a generalization, but I'll just say that we know that one shoe doesn't fit everything, right? But what we found is that a lot of people who abused had been abused themselves. The abuser was once the abused. And because they oftentimes don't have a space, and that's what this is about, having a safe space to speak freely about your abuse, to speak freely about what happened to you without judgment, without the fear of abandonment, without being judged again for something that you did not bring upon yourself. That because those spaces very rarely exist, that sometimes, oftentimes, people who have been abused, they act out in different ways. And one of those ways is to become an abuser themselves. Also, in my research, I found that oftentimes, whatever age, if you are sexually violated, there is a sense of arrested development that happens there in sense of your in the sense of your sexuality. That in some ways, if I was reading that if a person is molested at a certain age, oftentimes they will always go back to that moment, and they become attracted to people who were that same age as them when they were violated, right? So it gets very complicated. I say all that to say this. What I did is I decided to show the other side of the priest, to show the trauma that he himself had endured, or the pastor, I should say, the trauma that he himself had endured, not to excuse, not to justify at all, because this man is indeed brought to justice, and I believe anybody who does this needs to be brought to justice, but to begin the conversation and to really have a very nuanced, complex conversation about what does it mean, again, when someone is sexually abused at such an early age and they don't have a proper space to process or a proper space to heal. And so the scene you'll see is the scene in the film where we learn ourselves what happened to the pastor.
Son. Son, open the door. Come to me. You come to Daddy now. Knowing hurts. Pain makes us who we are. You see, nothing good has ever been accomplished without bloodshed. Those other people, they didn't understand you. They didn't see in you what I do. That's why God sent me to you, to train you in the way you must go. You'll appreciate it for this one day.
And again, that was a clip from Wolf, which was my debut feature. We premiered at South by Southwest in 2012. And as Samantha said in her introduction of me, you can find that film on many VOD platforms, iTunes, Amazon, Quality TV. And it's interesting because it always finds new life. I'm showing it at conferences a lot, sexual abuse conferences, and really sort of creating discourse again around this specific issue. And yeah. So that was 2012. And in between that, I made, several other projects and, other shorts. I had a short that was on HBO. I did some other things. But I had a grand opportunity, and this must have been in 2016, to go and shadow Ernest Dickerson on David Simon's The Deuce. He was directing the second episode. And shadowing basically entails being on set from pre-production all the way until post. So I'm literally there. I'm doing pre-pro. I'm there on set. I'm sometimes watching some casting. Oftentimes they didn't let you into those rooms, but I saw some of that stuff. And then I'm in the editing room, for the 4 days or 3 days that Ernest has in the room. And being on that set, I said, man, TV is something that I've always wanted to do. And I wanted to do TV, and I've always wanted to do television because, one, I feel like it gives you more room to tell your narrative, right? You don't have 15 minutes, right? You don't have 90 minutes, right? Oftentimes you have 7, 8 hours, right? Depending upon what you're doing. Obviously, I didn't make something that was 7, 8 hours, but you have the time to explore not only your main character, but you have an opportunity to sort of open up sort of other small presents, as I'll call them, right? By sort of showcasing other characters, right? Side characters, supporting characters, really delving into the lives of other people that in some ways do heavily influence your main character's journey, but they also have their own journey. Usually when you're looking at a short or feature, you really need to be focusing on your main character, right? Because you don't have the luxury or the time to move into all of those sort of different sort of areas. And so I decided I want to make this web series. Again, really bitten by that bug when I was in New York working on The Deuce, and decided, you know what, this is going to be the next thing for me. I was going to make a feature out of this, but I had decided not to. And I decided that I want to do television instead. And this is interesting because this story is really the story of my sister and many other people that I've known who have been in the system. My sister, probably over the course of 10 years or so, and maybe more, but had been in and out of prison. In 3, out 1, in 2, back out a few months, that whole thing. And I'll never forget that it must have been 2015, 2014. She got out, and that was the first time that I can remember really feeling like, she's gonna make it. She's gonna do it. Really feeling that desire to succeed, the desire to right her wrongs, the desire to forge a relationship with my nephew, her son, uh, a desire to sort of make up for lost time and lost opportunities, and to really build the life that she always wanted to live, or hope that she could live. And during the summer when she got out, I was living in Dallas, which is about a 4-hour drive from Dallas to San Antonio. So I would drive a lot and to see her, but I would also take her to different appointments. And when she was in, they would say things like, okay, go to this office and, they'll help you get a job, go to that office, they'll help you get housing, go here, they'll set you up, with food assistance, just the whole nine, right? They told her all these things, you get out with a binder, this thick with all of these people that you should go and meet. And I would take her to these meetings, and almost every one of them, I kid you not, the narrative that she was told when she was in was not true. They told me to come here and you could help me get a job. We don't do that. They told me that if I came here that you could again help me find a place to live. No, we don't do that yet. You better find a permanent place to live within 6 weeks, or you're going back to jail. You better get a job within a month, or you're going back to jail. But we can't help you. You'll figure it out. They told me you could help me with financial aid. Again, just there's all of these sort of things that she wanted to do. And I watched as doors were just slammed in her face because, as we know, the system is not uh, designed for you to get out of it. That is why it is called a system. It is designed for you to reoffend. Why do I say that? When you have something, a for-profit prison, we call it the prison industrial complex, someone must be there to create said profit. And so you must fill this space with bodies. And sadly, as we could see in our country, most of those bodies are Black and brown. Most of those bodies, and there's research that shows you this, that when a child is of a certain age, they start really figuring out, is this child going to go to college? Is this child going to go to prison? And they start already sort of figuring out, they build prisons oftentimes with that in mind, right? That we will fill this space, that it will be filled in 10 years. So we build it and boom, we now have to populate it with bodies. And so as I watched that and I saw my sister get all these doors slammed in her face and I watched her shrink, it brought that idea into much greater focus. If you ever read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, it will also bring it into a much greater focus, right? And as I watched that, I said, man, I don't think people really understand this. They don't get it, right? We very rarely get an opportunity to see into this in the way that I was seeing it. I had a front row seat to it. And so from all of that, I said, I have to make a narrative about this. I have to. And out of that comes the beginning and ending of everything, which is loosely based on my sister's struggle. It is not obviously, autobiographical per se, but there are moments in it that I, again, witnessed, saw, lived, helped orchestrate, right? Because I was there. And then in some ways, it is her story and also sort of an amalgamation of others, right? Because she was not the first. I've had cousins, I've had uncles, I've had godbrothers, I've known many people to be in the system. And I wanted to really tell their narrative from their point of view. And so again, we created this 5-part web series, The Beginning and Ending of Everything, which charts a woman's, again, struggle to not just acclimate, but to really build a life that she never had, right? We oftentimes say, oh, I want to rebuild my life. Well, sometimes individuals who have been in the system, they didn't really have, I hate to say they didn't have that much of a life, but the life that they want to create was not the life they were living before. So they are starting from scratch. And so you see her struggling to do that, but you also see her, an added sort of complication is a child that she had when she was in, and you see that child is gone. She left it with a boyfriend and she goes to get the baby and he's not there. And so the question now is not only where's the child, but where am I? And when I say where am I, who am I now? Because my whole sort of existence and the whole idea of me getting out and wanting to be clean and wanting to steer clear of the pitfalls and traps that I had sort of fallen prey to before was because I had this child to live for. So who am I now without the child, which makes the search much more aggressive, right? And yeah, so we created this 5-part series, which again was sort of my baptism into this idea of creating television or web series. And the scene I'm going to show you is actually a scene where Angelita, who's our main character, you see her here, she goes to, it's the last scene of the very first episode, and she goes to a almost an AA meeting of sorts, and she goes to meet a woman, or I should say reunite with the woman who had been her counselor when she was in. And you hear this woman basically tell her story. And it is this moment where you realize how intricately connected Angelita's struggle will be with this woman's past struggle and the things that she had to endure when she was first released from prison. And so it is both sort of a revelatory moment for the woman where she reveals a part of herself that she never revealed, but also it's a charge to Angelita. Will you be able to work? One of the things that she says is, you got to fight for your freedom. And as I made this, and even as I was sort of dealing with my sister, that was the one thing that I had to come to terms with, is that I could not fight for her freedom for her. She had to fight for it herself. And so here's this scene.
See, I was born an addict. Mama smoked crack until the day she had me. I guess she wanted me to disappear, but out I came, just like any other baby, kicking, screaming, afraid. But unlike them other babies, I ain't want no breast milk. I needed a hit. And for the next 30 years of my life, I got it any way I could. Flat back fucked for it, gave head in alleys for it, stole for it. Sold my soul to the highest bidder just so I can feel that high again. Then one day, I had a baby of my own. And she needed what I had been feeding her. What had been fed to me. She ain't last no more than 3 or 4 days. When they came and told me, I walked over and looked at her little body. This little thing that had been growing inside me, and I hated myself. But more than that, I envied her. Because she had escaped something that I couldn't. God had showed her mercy that I hoped he would show me in the back of one of them alleys at the hand of one of them fuckers. But that wasn't my story. You see, we all have a story. And this, what you see standing in front of you is hard work personified. It's determination personified. It's me and God working together. I had to let the old me die. I had to fight for my freedom. I had to be willing to pay the price for this. Are you willing to pay the price?
And again, that was a clip from the beginning of everything, a 5-part web series which was released in 2017. That went on to screen at the American Black Film Festival, and is now currently streaming on qualitytv.com. So you can watch the entire series there. You can also watch it on my website, exodusfilmworks.com. Next, I'm back to shorts again. I told you I was coming back to it. But it's interesting because this narrative will be very, very, very similar to the one with Katrina's son. I was watching a documentary one day, and as you can see, documentaries oftentimes lead me into other worlds and into other subjects that I want to explore. And this documentary was about a woman who ran a safe house for young girls who were trafficked, sex trafficked in New York. And I won't go into what the whole thing is about. It's great. You should watch it. But again, there's key moments in scenes that make me say, wow, I must explore this. There was a moment where a young lady said that her pimp, she was about 13 years old. This pimp was, 25 or so. She didn't make her quota being the amount of money that she was supposed to make a night. And he comes in and he beats her unmercifully with a belt, you know, the buckle of the belt, I believe. There's whelps all over her body. Leaves her in a hotel on the floor. She's shaking, she's crying. And he leaves her there. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, he comes back with Yoo-hoo and Cheetos. And she says, that is the moment where I knew he loved me. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, Yoo-hoo and Cheetos, after being beat senselessly in the floor of a hotel with the buckle of a belt. So I put that here. Then a few scenes later, a young lady said, it didn't matter how he treated me. He could have cut my foot off as long as he loved me. Ooh, man. So again, here I go. I'm researching. What is this? These 13-year-old girls who are not, this is the thing that we must remember what I'm saying with this. These are not our typical, these are not the typical narratives that we hear when we think of sex trafficking. It's always, you know, the young lady taken by force from a foreign country and she's locked in a hotel room, right? And I'm not saying that these things do not happen, but oftentimes it's not necessarily by physical force that these young ladies end up in these relationships with these men. It is a psychological stronghold and a manipulative relationship that sort of gets them caught up in this web of deception. And as I'm beginning to research this, I had the opportunity to talk to women who had been in the life and had gotten out. Some women were still in the life. I talked to pimps, both male and female, by the way. And one of the women that I had the opportunity to talk to, her name is Joy. And Joy had been in for 20 years, 30 years, and had gotten out, and now she works as a counselor. And they sent her on the streets at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to pull these young ladies off. And she said, yeah, she says, you know, when I was in it, the only way that I got through was, one, the drugs, but also she said, I developed dissociative disorder because I could not be physically and spiritually in my body while this thing was happening to me and live. I would have killed myself. And so I had to leave my body. I had to find a means of escape. And she said it could be something as simple as I literally was jumping on clouds, right? I was back in grandma's house, right? Whatever it may be, I was not there. And then when this, you know, when this was over, I could return to my body, and it didn't necessarily physically affect me in the same way because of that. That's what she was telling herself. Later on, she found out that it completely physically and psychologically wrecked her. And so out of that, I said, I want to write a narrative about this for 2 reasons. One, I want to write a narrative about it because one of the things that, again, I'm interested in is telling the story of the young lady that lives next door, who this is happening to, who we judge, who we walk by, who we say, well, she could go home, she has a family, right? When we really, again, don't really understand what is happening with her. We don't understand her full narrative. We are judging her, right? We're showing no empathy, right? And that's oftentimes what we do. And I think film has a way of allowing us into a world that we have never been in, which again, I think can help create the empathy that we need to eradicate some of these injustices. And then not only did I want to create that narrative, but I also wanted to create the narrative through the lens of this disorder, through the lens of a young lady who had a dream, right? Who could have been a great, as you can see, ballet dancer. But she finds herself caught in this web, and the only means of escape that she has is to escape in her mind via ballet, right? Which is very interesting because I was talking to a student one day and he said, oh, you you got this from the Edward Degas narrative. I didn't know who Edward Degas was. I didn't study art in that way. Didn't know who he was. Edgar Degas, and what do you mean? You have to. So he ordered me this book, and I started to read it, and I'm looking at Edgar Degas' work, and I'll never forget there was a painting called The Rape. It's a young lady in her full ballet gear sitting on a bed in a room, and there's a man standing there, right? He's sort of standing over her as though he's about to pounce on her, and she looks in distress. Keep going, and you see other images of young ladies in ballet school, but there's always these men around. Who are these men? What's happening here? Why are these old men here watching these young ladies dance? Who are they? And of course, if you know about the Paris Ballet, you begin to research and you find out that these men were the ones paying for these young ladies to be in ballet school sometimes. And that comes with a price. The price being that they could do whatever they wanted to do with and to these young ladies. Because again, in some ways, by paying their sort of tuition, they owned them, right? And you really realize that that's nothing but a very sophisticated front for sex trafficking and prostitution, right? And sexual exploitation. That's all that is. We can put a cherry on and do whatever we want to do and say whatever, but that's what it is, right? And so again, researching that, thinking about what Joy told me, thinking about the character that I've already created, out comes Heavenly. Feature film script, again, struggled to get the money. And so I decided to make a short a few years ago for two reasons. One, to prove to myself that I could make it, right? Because it's a very complicated narrative in terms of how do I get in and out of this sort of very sort of visceral and graphic world of sex trafficking into this beautiful world of ballet. How do I make those connections in a way that feels organic and it doesn't feel forced, right? So just sort of playing around with the concepts and figuring out what would it look like visually, what would it sound like, what would those different worlds be framed like, how would I use the camera to sort of show the different worlds in which she will live in, and how do I bring her in and out of those worlds again in a way that does not feel forced or too jarring for the audience. There is a level of jarring the audience that I wanted to achieve, but I didn't want it to be jarring to the point where it felt amateurish. And so again, made the short to sort of play around with those concepts. And I want to show you a scene from it. And the scene that I want to show you is a scene where Heavenly first is asked to sell herself. She has been being groomed this entire time, right? And grooming comes in the form of gifts. It comes in the form of sort of love, of a listening ear, of being there, of making sure that this person knows that you would never do anything to hurt them, right? There's all of these sort of grooming techniques that happen to the point where you become their everything. And once you're their everything, then in a sense, you can ask them for anything. And so what I decided to do is I took the radical choice, and you heard me say earlier that I had an opportunity to talk to female pimps, and I took the radical choice of making her trafficker a woman. Because another thing that I found in my research is that oftentimes pimps, even if they're male, they always have a woman who they call their bottom. But her task is in some ways to help them recruit, because the women trust them more than they would trust the men. And that's not always, again, again, none of these are rules that go across the board, right? Everybody works differently, but that's a thing that I found. And so here you will see this woman who became also almost like a mother to Heavenly, you will see her convince her to go in and do this thing. And then you will see how the world sort of shifts and changes in terms of going from, as I said, this very, very gritty, grimy world to this world of ballet.
I don't know how I'm gonna make it without her. You gonna make it, cause you got me. You special. You know that? I know he don't tell you that, but you are. And I'm here and we're gonna get through this together. I'm scared. I'm scared my first time too. We all are. But in the end, we know this is what we got to do to survive. To stay free from the shit we ran away from.
Beautiful.
You wanna stay free, right? Yeah.
Can't wait to fuck you, Heaven.
But freedom comes with a price. Here, get this in your purse. Hey, stop crying. You know it hurts me to see you cry. That's not heavenly.
And since I'm talking to a bunch of artists, I want to just stop for a second and talk about sort of how we approach this visually and with sound, because I think it's very important that when you think about film, that you understand that the camera is in some ways helping you to tell something that the characters are not even fully aware of, right? The camera is in some ways that third or fourth person in the room who sees something that no one else can see. And what do I mean by that? One of the things that we decided in terms of a visual choice is that for the moments where Heaven was in the real world, that we would shoot this in 4:3, that in some ways the camera would be signaling to us that she was boxed in, that she was trapped. But in her mind, she's not trapped, which is why, again, we have these beautiful, pink and red and yellow lights, right? Because in her mind, she has escaped something, right? She is now in a place where she's with someone who loves her. She's almost seeing the world through sort of rose colored glasses, right? She's sort of in this sort of environment that she doesn't even quite understand fully. And so in some ways, we know something that she doesn't know, right? We know that this is a manipulative relationship based upon our framing, but she thinks it's something else based upon our lighting and the ways in which we sort of compose it, in terms of it being on sticks, in terms of it being very close. We're on 85mm lenses. We're very, very close to her face, and we don't see a lot of the world because, again, she's trapped. And then we decided that when she went into the fantasy world, right, that we would literally expand the screen so that the audience could see the expansion happening. The world, quote unquote, is opening up because, again, this is her escape. This is, even though she is still trapped in that moment, right, in the moment that it's happening, she has found a way to cope with, she has found a way to process, she has found a way to allow herself to survive the trauma that is being inflicted on her body and her mind, right? And I stopped and sort of went there because I think it's very important, again, that not only do we talk about the subject matter of the film and why we created the film or why I decided to create the film, but I think it's also important to understand that I'm not just thinking about the text. I'm also letting the camera do a lot of this work. I'm letting the lighting do a lot of this work. I'm even thinking about the color of people's hair and what they wear and how they move through a frame. Am I moving the frame in terms of me moving the camera, or are they moving the frame in terms of them walking through the frame? Is it handheld or is it on sticks, right? I'm thinking about all of that because all of that, every choice that we make as filmmakers, right, it has an effect on the audience. Even if the audience doesn't quite understand what's happening, they can feel it. And so I'm always thinking about those things from that sort of place of what is the audience going to walk away with and what is the audience going to feel when they are watching whatever it is that I have sort of put in front of it. Next up is Brother. Brother is it's an interesting film because I actually think it has more relevance. And we shot this in 2018. Basically a year and a half before we all went home. Is that true? It might have been even, I guess it's about a year before we all went home. And when I say home, I mean in terms of being in quarantine. And it's interesting because I think after what happens in May to George Floyd, it has more relevance. And it's interesting because it is after that when it actually starts to screen and begin to win awards, right? And I say that it has more relevance now, or people think it has more relevance because I think it's no more relevant today than it was when I made it and 50 years ago, to be honest with you. But I think that for people, as we start to think about what it means to say the phrase Black Lives Matter, what does it really mean to say that I am anti-racist? What does it really mean to say that I am an ally, right? These are all the words that have become all the rage, right? But what does it really, really, truly mean to adopt those things and live them out, right? And what you will find in Brother, and I will show you a clip in a second, but this is a film about two young men who literally are like brothers. They do everything together. They're in high school. They're on a wrestling team together. They're dating some of the same girl, right? They're just in each other's space all the time. And then Caleb's brother comes home. And when he sees this relationship, this interracial relationship, this interracial friendship between his brother and his brother's best friend, who again is almost like a brother to him, no, he can't have that for two reasons. One, he's a white supremacist, right? And he does not believe in the quote unquote mixing of the races. And two, he feels as though his place is being taken. He's being replaced by his brother's Black friend, and he must put a stop to it. And so throughout the film, you will see, if you go and watch it later, you will see the very sort of microaggressive and then macroaggressive ways that Casey sort of begins to build a wedge between them to the point, and I won't give the film away, but to the point where something happens where I believe it's the point of no return. And these young men will probably never, ever be able to be friends again. And I started with the whole notion of what happens in May and using those phrases because I think that what I was attempting to do with this film is really ask this question. What does it really mean when someone says they're colorblind? What does it really mean when someone says, again, they don't see race? What does it really mean when someone allows little microaggressions that they witness to take place and they don't become an ally and stand up in that moment? What does it mean to stand by and witness the incitement of violence? Trump words, yet you don't really get upset until January 6th when there's an insurrection. What does it mean, right, when we start to talk about being anti-racist and being allies in the struggle? Because I believe that it is those small things, when left unchecked, that lead to the bigger things that become the more violent outbursts that we see. And this film really asks that question. Is there a sense of racism or discrimination that exists in all of us because it is literally baked and stitched into the fabric of the country that we live in? That it is literally in the air that we breathe, that it is in almost every image that we see on screen, and we don't even realize oftentimes that we're being programmed to see it that way. It is not the lens that we see things through. Back to the whole notion of, right, in May, we're saying Black Lives Matter, and we are challenging things, but these things have always been there, right? So what does it mean to stand idly by and watch? And then, does that make you complacent? And does it make you, responsible for the much larger sort of violent outbursts that happen? And so the clip I'm going to show you, and again, those are all the questions that I'm asking as I am sort of writing the screenplay and thinking about this relationship between these young men and then this third character who comes in, and sort of the dynamic of the relationship that I want to create and show throughout the very short 15 minutes that this film is. And here's a scene, and you'll get a sense of what I mean.
So you and him was pretty close, huh?
Yeah, like brothers. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way.
I mean, you're like brothers. I'd just be careful if I was you.
Of?
Oh, yeah. Come on. Not everybody's like us. No, like you. I've seen this kind come. Oh, wait, they try to sneak on up. They get close. Take advantage. Just watch yourself. That's all I'm saying. You hear?
Hear what? Nothing. So, how was it being locked up?
I gotta say, it wasn't no fucking walk in the park.
My bad. You spamming?
Nah, you scam, dude. You know, ain't no fucking video game. Chill.
Yeah, bro. Chillax.
No, bro. You chillax. Ah, now I see you want to hang out with this kid. This fucker's got balls. Big fucking black balls. Maybe we can get you a pair. I'm playing. Just fucking playing with you. Chill the fuck out. Y'all need to chillax, bros. You good?
All right. And again, you can find that full film on my website if you want to check it out. And lastly, I'll end here with this film, Edwin. I got a call from a filmmaker friend of mine. This probably was 5 years ago at this point, maybe 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, "Hey, Aki, I have this story. I have the rights to this story. And I just don't know. I don't really know what to do with it. You know, it is such a compelling narrative. I don't know if I'm the right person to tell it though, right? I'm not sure if I really can sort of understand all of the sort of nuances and all of it, right? So I would love for you to come on this journey with me." I said, "Well, what's the story?" "Well, Edwin has been in prison. At that point, it was about 25 years. Sentenced to 40 at age 12. Killed a cab driver." So, oh wow, where do I come into this, right? What's the catch? "Oh, he's from San Antonio, which is where I'm from." I said, "Well, send me the transcript," right? He had the rights to Edwin's transcript because Edwin wrote a book called 12-Year-Old Killer because he wanted to get his book published. So I'm reading through the transcript one night and I'm like, I couldn't stop reading it because I realized where I came in, because I realized that I knew Edwin and didn't know I knew him. I realized that his sister and my sister were friends, that his grandmother lived across the hallway from me at some point, that he would come and hang out in the projects that I grew up in, that we would be in the same spaces and we didn't even know it, and that I knew the narrative and just didn't realize it, right? I didn't make the point of connection until I started reading the transcript. And so I went to visit Edwin and still didn't know. I wasn't convinced. I didn't know, right? You know, what's the end here, right? And after I went and talked to Edwin, I'll never forget, we sat down for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we talked. And not only did I decide to go on this journey with Will, but I became good friends with Edwin because I realized that I was meeting someone who could have been me, or I could have been him. That there were certain things that maybe I had that he didn't, right? That spared me from his fate, but that we were so close, right? In terms of where we lived, in terms of sometimes even the way that we thought, that I could have been him. And so the story is, how does a 12-year-old wind up in the back of a cab driver, sorry, in the back of a cab with a gun to the head of a cab driver and ultimately pulls the trigger and murders him. How does one end up there? What are the things that Edwin was facing, that he was dealing with? Again, this is not about making excuses. Oftentimes people say, well, you know, he committed a murder. Not saying he didn't, and he would never say he didn't. He will admit that he committed a murder. He will admit that it was his fault. But there are certain sort of things, right? That, and I call them ingredients. What are the ingredients that creates a Edwin Debro Jr.? And I am so interested in that because that is in many ways my life's work, is really understanding why people do the things that they do and making sure that we don't let society, and when I say society, I'm really talking about our government, we don't let them off the hook for the ways in which they have disenfranchised, the ways in which they have ghettoized, the ways in which they have literally forced certain demographics of people to live on the margins and fight for so little, literally kill each other for the limited amount of resources that they give them. Right? This is indeed the story of being Black in America, right? And so anyway, I'm right now in the process of developing that feature, and we're writing that, and doing extensive interviews with Edwin. Edwin was finally released, and this goes into the clip I'm going to show you. He was finally released at age 40 after serving 29 years. Remember, he was 12 when he went in, and now he's 40. What does life look like when you literally have spent your full life behind bars? You grew up behind bars, right? When I'm in high school, you're behind bars, right? When I'm having my first kiss, you're behind bars. When I'm having my first job, you're behind bars. When I'm in college, you're behind bars. When I'm walking the stage, you're behind bars. Stage for graduating high school, I mean, you're behind bars, right? There's so many things that I was able to do and experience that he was not able to experience because of what he did. But also it asked the question, at 12 years old, should someone spend 40 years in prison, right? Because it also asked the larger question, what is the function of a prison? Is it to hold? Is it to rehabilitate? Is it to punish? Is it to reprogram? There's a great book by Angela Davis called Are Prisons Obsolete? Right? And she asked the question, why are prisons, as I said earlier, filled with Black and brown bodies? If the purpose, right, is to punish people for real crime, why is a prison, again, full of people who have committed petty crimes? Edwin did not commit a petty crime. I'm just using that as an example. But also, why do we have juvenile delinquents, again, serving these long sentences, again, if the point is to rehabilitate people and get them out into society so they can actually live and be, because it costs me as a taxpayer more money to keep you in prison than it does for you to be out actually working a job and going to college, right? And so I had the opportunity to go down the day Edwin got out, and I spent the day with him and his family. And so this is just the very beginning of that story, him sort of telling what happened that day, and us just getting a sense of how the narrative would sort of unfold.
I had went to juvenile for criminal mischief. The juvenile detention released me to the custody of my friend's mom, and they instructed her to take me to Floyd Hardeman, who they presumed was my uncle. I was drinking Thunderbird, and Floyd had his brother go call the cab to ask for Curtis Edwards. After he's been driving for a while, Floyd grabs him, and he starts struggling with him. In the car, he's accelerating at high speed. I'm in the back, and in my twisted way of thinking, I'm thinking the only way I'm gonna get this car to slow down is by shooting. so I shot him. After that, I don't remember nothing from that point on besides waking up in hospital the next day. When I look at that picture, I look at a child who thought he had the world figured out, and he was really clueless because 12-year-old Edwin went through a lot of chaos. Finally. Oh. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling blessed. Glad to be out.
To get to his destination. Oh, really? Yeah. So you can go out to eat? You can't go out to eat. Yeah, so. All the time I was in my mind saying, you're not gonna cry. You're not gonna cry. Oh, but then I cried. I cried.
And I would like to leave you here. This is a quote from Angela Davis, who I've already mentioned before. And I won't read the entire quote, but what I will point out is the very last thing that she says, which is basically progressive art can, and she says all these other things, but she basically says it can propel people towards social emancipation. And I believe that the very function of art is to lead us towards social emancipation. It's to free us from our biases. It's to free us from our pain. It's to challenge us. It's to charge us. It's to force us to see the world through the eyes of individuals who we've never had the opportunity to brush up against, to spend time with, to talk to, so that we can all, right, together begin to sort of create the world that we want to create. I think a lot of our issues, there are a lot of reasons why I think we have the issues, but I think one of the biggest issues is that we live in a space where we can just judge people without knowing anything about them. And we think that's okay. And we also have the tendency to believe everything that we hear about an individual, right? If I saw it on screen, it's true. That's not true, right? We don't do the research. And so I believe that progressive art, and that's why I love this, progressive art that moves beyond the typical. I believe that, there's that art that you hang on a wall and you look at, right? But I even think that art, right, is speaking something and should be saying something to us as a society, and should be really changing us internally so that we can see the change in the world that we want to see, and so that we can be that change. Because it is not until we again begin to reach across and talk to those and interface with those who we don't know, that we will see again this notion of social emancipation. And that's all I got for you. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now, if I can find my, there we go, my mouse here. And I believe that either Caleb and I or Samantha.
That's right. That's right. Yaki, thank you very much for an excellent presentation and talk. There's a couple questions that have come in, and I'd like to pose a couple of them to you. And for those who are listening, please feel free to post some questions to the Q&A section, and we can present them to Yaqui. So first question, your work likely connects with audiences in very personal ways. Could you speak about the different ways your work has been received?
Yeah, I'm gonna speak directly to that by telling you a story. I'll never forget. This was my thesis film, actually. It's called The Second Coming. It's about a father who gets out of prison and returns home to make amends with his son. And he ultimately ends up taking a murder rap for his son because he'd never been there for his son. And finally his way of being there and showing that his son, that he loved him and that he was gonna father him, was by taking this murder rap. And I'll never forget, I showed that film at a festival, and this may sound weird when I say it, but I went to the restroom and I'm literally at the urinal, right? And I turned, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. There was a line of men. I'm like, oh, maybe they're waiting to use the urinal, but there are others in here, right? I don't know what's happening. They were there to talk to me about the film. One man in particular said to me, I am literally about to get in my car right now, and this was in San Antonio, and drive to Houston, because I realized that after seeing that work, that I have not been an effective father, that I have not loved my son unconditionally. And you showed me via that film what unconditional love means, that it is a sacrificial love, right? That you must have for your children. And, that was the first time that I remember saying, wow, this stuff really does have impact beyond, again, what I could have even imagined, right? I knew that it would touch people, but to see that it made people really begin to rethink the ways in which they were living, rethink their relationships, begin to literally change things in their lives so that they could be better human beings. That was the moment where I was like, man, I have to not only keep doing this, but I have to make sure that, I am aware of that I am aware of that impact, because that's a raw impact. Because even with Wolf, I remember showing Wolf in one of the screenings, and I kid you not, at least 5 people stood up and and they had never told these stories in public, told their stories in a packed theater of how they had been sexually abused and how they had been ostracized for it, because they said they saw themselves on screen in a way they had never seen themselves before. And that's a raw emotion, right? That's a feeling where I am opening up almost a wound, right? And really having people process or go back into their minds and begin to exhume things that they probably had buried long ago. And that's a hard thing. It's interesting, because I try not to take that kind of responsibility on myself, but I understand that that's the work that I make, because I believe that that's the work that I was called to make. And so, yeah, the films have had, all kinds of impacts, both positive and negative. I made a film about a Iraqi veteran who, was suffering from PTSD, and I was basically attacked for that film. What gives me the right? I didn't know the story, and I should never have, put that on screen, because I am gonna cause, strife between individuals who had tried to move past that, and they don't need to relive that, and I don't need to trigger them, right? I heard all of that. So the films have had all kinds of reactions, and so the impact has been varied. But I will say that the one thing that I can always say about my film, and my body of work, I should say, is that it's going to get a reaction out of people after they watch it, good or bad.
Great, thank you. Let's see, another question that has been asked is, do you feel that your faith has influenced your art?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I think that I believe that everyone, and this gets a little controversial, but I believe that everyone can be redeemed if they want to be redeemed. But redemption isn't pretty. right? Redemption requires sacrifice. Redemption requires giving up something, oftentimes, that has made you comfortable because you possessed it, right? And I believe that for me, that is a sort of direct connection to my spirituality, right? The idea that not only do images have power, but that we as human beings have a responsibility to other human beings, right? Not to get too religious on you, but I think about people when they talk about Christ, and everybody talks about they want to if they're I want to be like, if they're Christian, I want to be like, or whatever they be. But it's like, I don't think you really do, because guess what? You got to remember that Christ died, right? So my question is, are you willing to die to do what's right? And that always is the thing that I'm thinking about. That again, when you are doing the kind of work that challenges people, that charges people, that makes people uncomfortable because it is making them really see themselves in a way that they've never seen themselves, you know, there can be a danger in that, honestly. I mean, I even think about the work that I do as a dean. I am sometimes fighting against a system that is hell bent on keeping itself the way that it is. That's dangerous, because that system, as someone said, is durable and it understands how to recycle itself. And I am standing in front of it, challenging it and charging it to do what it deep down in its heart of hearts knows it should do. And so, yeah, I mean, that leads everything and guides every decision that I make, every project that I take. I am very conscious about the things that I work on. What is the impact going to be? Am I doing something good for the world? Right. And I sometimes believe that disruption is good, right? A lot of times disruption is good. You must disrupt old systems in order to give birth to new ones. And so, yeah, my spirituality is the thing that leads and guides every decision that I make as an artist, as a man, as a husband, as a father, all of it.
Do you find that it was difficult critiquing the institution, i.e. the church, in your film, The Wolf, or Wolf?
And yeah, I struggled with that for a while. I really did. I because I never wanted it to be an attack, right? And again, it's weird to say that when in fact that's exactly what it is. It's a charge, right? It's literally saying you are wrong for what you did, and you gotta right that wrong. But again, I don't necessarily see that as as a bad thing, because a lot of times we do things because people allow us to do them, and they don't check us or call us out. And so it was very difficult, because at first I was thinking about it through this lens of, wait a minute, no, I am putting a stain on the church. I am talking down on the institution that I have many issues with it, by the way, but that I am a part of, right? Um, I am I'm calling out people who I may respect and love, right? But guess what? At some point, I had to come to terms with the idea that that's what this is all about. Again, that as we think about art as a way to combat oppression and to call out oppressive systems and structures and to pull them down, then that's what I'm doing with Wolf. That's what I'm doing with Katrina's Son. That's what I'm doing with Brother. That's what I'm doing with San Antonio, the film I'm going to make soon. That's what I'm doing with all of my work, because I believe that it is my responsibility as an artist to do that.
So how do you approach conducting your research and interviews with people who have been through traumatic experiences?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because you don't want to re-traumatize anyone, right? And so I take it slow. I let them almost lead me. What are you comfortable with? What do you want to say? What don't you want to say? But I have to say this, I also demand honesty, right? I can oftentimes tell when somebody's, feeding me a line, right? And when they're actually being truthful. And if I begin to feel like you're feeding me a line, you know, sometimes my response will be, you know, maybe you're not ready for this. And I respect that, actually, because everybody does not want to tell their narrative because it can re-traumatize you, right? It can make you again go back to a place that you left long ago, a place that you said you would never go back to. And so again, I'm careful with what I ask. I don't just jump in and start asking questions. I want to get to know you as a human being, not as someone who I'm trying to, you know, leech your story from. You know, I even think about that with documentaries. Sometimes we, you know, we go to a person and put a camera in their face. It's wrong, first of all. And I also don't think you're going to get the most genuine version of them if you do that, right? Because they don't know you, right? So I want to get to know the people that I am talking to. I build rapport with them. I build relationships with them. I spend time with them. We, you know, even after the thing is done, I'm in constant contact with them. And again, I let them sort of lead and guide the research, and I let them determine, right, their level of comfortability with telling me anything. And if they're not comfortable, I let them know that it's fine, it's okay. I'm not here to pry, right? And that in some ways, I'm telling your narrative as a means to help you process. And if this is not something that you are ready for, if you're not ready to process, then yeah, we should leave this thing alone. Because again, I understand what happens when you exhume something that you actually thought you had killed.
So it's kind of interesting how your responses are relating to some of the questions coming in. Another individual asked the question about your emotional connection to your characters and how you remain objective while being connected, or do you find ways where you need to detach or disconnect?
Yeah, you know, the one thing that I think I do well, right, is I don't, even if I know a character, I don't go in with any preconceived idea of who they are, right? And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when we're very close to a subject, we are afraid to let that subject be raw, open, authentic, right? Because we don't want anyone to judge that particular person or see that person in a negative light, right? I don't do that, right? I don't create deities out of my characters, right? They're not gods, they're human. And what that means is that they're all flawed, right? Even the best, the protagonists who we want to save, right? Who we rooting for, there are flaws there. And I am very aware that I must expose those flaws in order to create a very human, nuanced, complex, and multidimensional portrait of whatever person that I'm putting on screen, right? So I don't only tell one point of view. Also, you know, look, if this thing starts to affect me emotionally, it's good, because that means that I'm in it. My soul is connected to it. My heart is connected to it. My DNA is fully, in some ways, connected to the DNA of the character that I am created. Right, my flesh is becoming their flesh, and for me, that's the moment where you want to be when you create. You know, I remember watching a behind the scenes featurette of Boys Don't Cry, and Hilary Swank looks to Kimberly Pearson. She says, "I think I'm losing myself. I literally feel as though I am leaving my body." That's something. And Kimberly Pierce says to her, you know, it's interesting because that is in some ways, sometimes, the way that the process that happens when someone is actually transitioning, right? So you are now connecting yourself, right, to the blood and bone, right, of the character that you're playing. And yeah, it's uncomfortable. Yeah, you need to, you know, there are moments where you don't want to go too far. You do need to walk away, and you do need to allow yourself the space to get out of the house and get away from that computer and walk away, you know, from that set for a second, because you don't want to lose yourself, but you do want to make sure that you're fully, truly 100% connected in such a way that we don't know where they start and you end. And so I, you know, look, I live for those moments, right? I think those are the moments where I am my best self, where I create the most complex characters, where I create characters that sort of become so universal that almost anyone can see themselves in it, because I'm connecting again with the human experience in them, their fears, their desires, their turn-ons, their turn-offs. I'm connecting with all of that, and I welcome that, because again, I think those are the characters that speak to me when I watch a film, and so I assume that there are people out there who also want to see those characters in my films.
Thank you. Can you speak more about social emancipation and making art or creative act in the realm of quote, my facts and quote, your facts?
Yeah, look, all art is subjective, right? I mean, I can only tell a story from the lens with which I have lived a life, right? Now, with that being said, I think it's important that if you are going to tell a story from someone else's vantage point, this goes into the whole notion of their facts, that you find entry points into them that you can connect with, right? Because if you don't, then now you are creating them from a place of judgment. You're creating them from a place of hearsay almost, right? I tell my students all the time, don't create characters based on other films without doing any research. Doesn't make sense. Yeah, seeing that film could spark something, but if that's as far as it goes, you're creating caricatures, because guess what? You don't know how much research the person did for the film that you're watching. You have no clue. So you must, again, do as much research as you can, so that, again, you can tell nuanced and dimensional portraits of people. I think the other part of that question was about social emancipation. And again, I just believe that, when you make films that, I was watching The Dissident last night, for example, and when you begin to really dig into, what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, and not only the sort of sophisticated way that it happened, but the sophisticated surveillance that went into it, and the months-long sort of tracking of what he was doing, and right. You must reveal that stuff, because I think we as humans and we as people, we need to see that, because now that I know this information, it sort of can set me free in terms of the way that I operate in the world, the way that I treat people, the way that I see others, the research that I will now do, because then me seeing one thing again takes me down a rabbit hole of looking for other sources and really trying to understand this whole thing, right? And so I think that in terms of art emancipating us, it's a matter again of us, not sugarcoating it, right? Being in your face with it, telling the truth, even if, we're ostracized for it, even if, we lose friends and family behind it. I think it's important to be honest in your storytelling, because honesty is the thing, as they say, the truth will set you free. I believe that. And if you're an honest storyteller, and I mean honest even to the point where you might be criticizing yourself on screen, where you make something that's so uncomfortable that you might have to get up when you're watching the film and walk away, or you might have to look away. That's the art that emancipates us as individuals and as a collective, because that's the art that really gets to the root of who we are as humans.
Could you speak a little bit more about how you see the difference between documentary and fiction films and their power to move people?
It's interesting, because I think each, I can't, how do I say this? I have been moved tremendously by both documentaries and narrative films, right? Because I think, again, exactly what I just said, it depends upon the vantage point from which the film is being told. And what I mean by that, I don't even mean the point of view in terms of character. What I mean, where is the creator coming from in terms of the sort of truthfulness of the story, the authenticity of the story, the sort of their mission when they're telling the narrative. Are they trying to manipulate me, or are they just trying to give me information? Or again, are they trying to tell me something about myself? Are they trying to tell something or more sort of universal, right? And so I don't know if there's a huge difference. I mean, there's difference in terms of making it, but in terms of impact, I think a good film is a good film. You know, I was moved by The Dissident, just like I was moved by Judas and the Black Messiah, just like I was moved by MLK FBI, right? Just like I was moved by, you know, Charlize Theron's portrayal of Eileen Wuornos in Monster, right? Just like I was moved by One Night in My, right? So I don't know if the mediums per se give different feelings. I think a good film is a good film. A truthful film is a truthful film. An authentic sort of portrayal of humanity is an authentic portrayal of humanity, either in the documentary space or in the narrative space.
And the last question we have for this evening, what keeps you going with all the weight of these topics, and how do you keep yourself motivated?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I'm called to do this. You know, I know that may sound strange, but I believe that I believe that I was put on the earth to do this, right? I don't think I'm the only one that was put on the earth to do this. I think we all are put here for a reason, to tell certain narratives. And when I say tell certain narratives, I think engineers are telling narratives. I think geometry teachers are telling narratives. I think the postal worker is telling a narrative, right? We are all put here for a purpose. And what keeps me going is I believe that Yaki Smith's purpose is to make meaningful work, be film work. I also write op-eds. I also write articles. I write poems. Obviously, I'm a screenwriter. I mean, in any medium that I'm working in, even as an associate dean, right? I believe that there's a mission that I have to tell the stories of those who have been deemed invisible, to make them visible, those who have been silenced, to actually give them voice, to offer back to them the opportunity to speak for themselves, and to actually offer them humanity in a way that humanity has been taken from them. That's what keeps me going, believing again that this is what I was here to do. And also, look, as heavy as these things are, I actually get, you know, I take so much pleasure in doing this work, right? It's my life's work, and it's the thing that keeps me up at night. It's the thing that wakes me up in the middle of the night and makes me jump on a laptop, or, you know, roll over and start writing in a journal, or you know, wake up and start reading an article, or just sort of trying to find inspiration in all types of places. I am fed by this physically and spiritually. And so that's what keeps me going, right? Because if I was not doing this, I don't know what I would be doing. I actually don't know if I would be as effective as I am now in any other space. Because again, I'm here for this. And I believe again that not only was I put here to do it, but I believe that I am put here for a certain group of people. Everybody's not going to dig Yaki's work. Everybody's not going to watch Yaki's work. Everybody's not going to be talking about Yaki's work in a positive way, right? But there are individuals who will, because I believe that I was put here for them, whoever they are. They will find me and I will find them. And so even the quest and the search for them to help them become emancipated vis-a-vis the art that I create, that's what also keeps me going.
Okay, Yaki, it has been a wonderful privilege to spend the last 2 hours with you. And from Kansas City, we say thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an honor being with you all. Thank you again for inviting me. I hope that everyone who is here watching this presentation, that you got some out of it, that you know, I have charged you, that I have challenged you, and that I have sort of sent you now on a path in terms of the art that you would create, and that you really walk away from here thinking, how can I impact the world with my voice, with my art, and with just every interaction that I have. And so again, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for inviting me to do this.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.